The United States does not care what anybody says about human rights in the occupied territories. They tell you that they care, but in reality, the proof is in the pudding and on the ground. Have things changed for the Palestinian Americans to the better? We don't know.
The issue of the visa waiver program for Israel is a hot topic, and there is a small window of time to get it approved. However, there are questions and concerns that have not been answered by the State Department. Palestinians in the United States want to ensure that Palestinian Americans, whether they live in the occupied West Bank or in the US, are treated like all other Americans in terms of points of interest and their ability to travel throughout Israel like any other American. US law is clear: there can't be discrimination, no matter what the Israeli reasoning might be. To talk more about that, I have with me from the United States Vice President of US Palestine Council, writer and activist, Dr. Bishara Bahbah. Welcome to our program, Dr. Bishara. And
thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Granting Israel by the United States the visa waiver program constitutes another aspect of the American unlimited support for the Israeli government and the Israeli occupying power in general. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, let me clarify or explain to our viewers what the visa waiver program is.
Sure.
The visa waiver program is essentially an agreement between the United States and other countries whereby the citizens of other countries can go into the United States without obtaining a prior visa, meaning that they get the visa at the airport. Now, there are regulations pertaining to that, but so far, about over 50 countries have that agreement with the United States. The visa waiver program with Israel is quite problematic, and the reason for that is because there are many unanswered questions, as you have indicated earlier. But from what we know, the agreement, the draft agreement, has already been signed or has already been drafted recently, and it is expected to be signed by the end of May, which is really a very small window. We're talking about less than 6 weeks. The US State Department and the Homeland Security are still requesting comments on these issues. Tomorrow, I believe I will be at the White House meeting with officials there to discuss this and other issues. But the key issue with the visa waiver program is reciprocity, meaning the United States requires that citizens be treated equally among any country that is part of the visa waiver program. Now, but there are a lot of unanswered questions. One of them is, for example, with a dual US Palestinian passport holder, meaning somebody who is an American citizen but also has the Palestinian passport, be able to rent a car at the airport at Ben Gurion, drive it to Ramallah and back like any other American. So that's one issue that needs to be clarified. The other issue that needs to be clarified is with a person who is, let's say, Palestinian American or a regular American, be able to visit Gaza, going through the airport, and then to Gaza, and back to Israel, back to the airport, and back to the United States. So we don't have an answer with regard to Gaza. And Gaza has been the least of the topics discussed because the Israelis are resisting any discussion with regard to Gaza.
Yes.
The third issue that needs to be addressed would be would a Palestinian American be able to get immediate help if they are denied entry at the airport? Meaning, does the State Department have a hotline whereby Palestinian Americans can call and say, I'm stranded at the airport at Ben Gurion, and the Israelis are not allowing me to go in. What am I supposed to do? And of course, the fact that when you enter at the airport, many Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans, Chilean Americans are questioned and stranded for hours at the airport. Now, that does not happen with other Americans going through, particularly Jewish Americans. And here, the US law requires that Palestinian Americans be treated like Jewish Americans going to Israel.
Yes, and
I'm not going though.
Yes, and Dr. Bishara, this argument started when the program was announced. Now, did the State Department take these points into account? Are they responding positively to any of these points that you mentioned?
Well, that's a very good question, because a letter was just sent a few days ago to the State Department, to Secretary Blinken, and to the Homeland Security Secretary with regard to this particular issue. Now, we have addressed them with the State Department and Homeland Security. We have raised these issues. They know very well where we stand, yet they have not responded to us. What we want are guarantees in writing, so that the Israelis cannot escape from the responsibility of treating Palestinian Americans or Arab Americans the way they would treat any other American entering Israel. Not just from the airport, but also from any land entries, such as the bridges, for example.
Yes, and Dr. Bishara, if we talk about that from a political point of view, you know that many organizations are calling on governments in the West and everywhere to boycott Israel because of its violations of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, while the United States Department is granting the waiver program for the Israeli people and the Israeli government. Does this mean that the United States is determined to continue to support the Israeli maltreatment of the Palestinians and the continuation of its occupation of the Palestinian land?
You know, that's a very important point, because the United States, first of all, there has not been an agreement yet.
Yes.
So there has been a draft of an agreement. We have not seen the draft of the agreement. But there's the letter that was sent to Secretary Blinken and to the Homeland Security Secretary raised various issues, which are the conditions of the visa waiver program. Now, Israel has actually a very small window to acquire the visa waiver program, because the number of refusals for those who apply for visas among Israelis has to be less than 3%. Now, Israel was able to achieve that because of the pandemic. Now, with time, the Israelis, if they don't come with an agreement soon, they're going to miss out on the agreement, because the percentage of denials probably is higher because the pandemic restrictions have been lifted. The United States does not care what anybody says about human rights in the occupied territories. They tell you that they care, but in reality, the proof is in the pudding and on the ground. Have things changed for the Palestinian Americans to the better? We don't know. Have things not changed to the better in terms of the treatment of Palestinians in the occupied territories, especially now that the Amnesty International has released quite an extensive report and called Israel an apartheid state.
Yes, and Dr. Bishara, now the Palestinian American community and the pro-justice activists are trying to convince the State Department to stop granting Israel the visa waiver program. Do you have there, the Palestinian Americans, any initiative to convince the United States administration to facilitate Palestinians' visits to their relatives and their friends in the United States? Because you know, it's too difficult for a Palestinian to get a visa from Palestine to the United States. Is there anything like this on your agenda?
On the meaning granting Palestinians visas?
Yes.
That's actually not on the agenda. What we're trying to concentrate on is the visa waiver program. The reason why it's important, because it gives us an opportunity to force Israel to make changes to its regulations, to the manner in which it treats Palestinian and Arab Americans going into Israel. Now, with regard to Palestinians getting the visa waiver program, that we have not even opened that discussion.
Yes, not a visa waiver program. I mean to facilitate the Palestinians' journeys and visits to the United States. This is what I mean. Anyway, if the United States gives Israel the visa waiver program, does this mean that this is an official recognition by the United States Department of Israel's discrimination against the Palestinians, mainly the Palestinian Americans, who would not have freedom moving from Israel to the West Bank or from Israel to Gaza? Do you think so?
Well, this is what we are pushing for, essentially. We are pushing for, and we're doing this through a letter that was signed by the U.S.-Palestine Council, that was signed by the American Federation, and several institutions in Washington have helped draft that letter. And essentially, we are raising concerns about reciprocity, about the way in which Palestinians are being profiled, about physical searches, and also there's the issue of the primacy of the U.S. passport, meaning if you have two passports, we want the United States passport to be the primary passport. And Israel has not recognized that yet.
Yes.
Because if they say you have a Palestinian passport and that's your primary passport, then they're going to treat you like you are a resident of the West Bank. You have to go through the bridge in order to enter Israel. You can go to Ramallah, but you cannot go to Jerusalem without a permit, and so on.
Yes. Yeah, Dr. Bishara, my final question to you, Bishara, when we are talking about the visa waiver program, we are talking about the freedom of travel and the freedom of movement, okay? But when you come to the occupied Palestinian territories, you see the Israeli restrictions on the Palestinians' right to movement. For example, if you move from Ramallah to Jenin, which in normal time takes 1 hour, it might take you 4 hours today. And sometimes you don't continue your journey and you sleep at a friend's house in one of the villages between. So do you raise this issue to the State Department when you talk with the officials there about the freedom of movement and the freedom of travel?
There is no question that on the table we have a range of issues that we have been raising with the U.S. State Department. And I have to tell you that the Biden administration has been quite open in terms of providing access to Palestinian Americans to go to the State Department, meet with officials at the White House, and so on. All these issues are on the table. Now, one of the very important issues that we have to deal with because of the visa waiver program is on October 20th of 2022, the civil administrations enacted regulations for entry and residence of foreigners in the West Bank, meaning those foreigners, any foreigner going to Ramallah has to go through certain restrictions. However, any American going to an Israeli illegal settlement in the West Bank, they don't have to face those restrictions. Now, so we have this as a major obstacle, and the State Department is very well aware of the fact that these civil administration regulations have to be rescinded in order for reciprocity to be enacted between Israel and the United States.
Vice President of U.S. Palestine Council, Dr. Bishara Bahbah, it has been a great honor having you on our program. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching, and from you, Osama Nazal. Have a nice time.